AOL Wrecker. Thought we'd go over the Tumbril Nova, which was released a few weeks ago, but we've just had an update, part 2 of the Q&A, so I thought I'd go through the Q&A, give a bit of an overview. So part 1 was released 3 weeks ago. Yeah, December. A few things to sort of cover in here. One real issue I've got with this tank. But anyway, let's sort of start. So first one around the ships that the Nova will fit in. I mean, really, what they're on about here is that it's big, as you imagine, for a tank, and there's a limited amount of ships it's actually going to fit in. Funny enough, they talk about this a bit more in the Q&A, probably because of the amount of questions that people have had on this, so I'll probably cover that a bit more. Second one, size of the main gun. So they've confirmed this a size 4 ballistic cannon. The key here is the ballistic bit, although they do mention, well, it says it's not modular, which means it's integrated, but there are other hard points on the tank. So, for instance, missiles and so forth. My main issue is this S4 ballistic cannon, not the size or any of the rest of it, but it's actually the placement. So I hope they're going to update the design. So if you look at a different picture, if you look at this one, you can see it's off-center, which I'm sure from a design point of view looks quite good. But there's a very, very good reason why tanks don't have guns that are off-center, which is if this is a ballistic cannon, it's going to spin the whole turret. The second you fire it, you get a opposite action backwards, and the whole turret spins. So this is why on main battle tanks nowadays they're in the center. This just makes no sense at all. So hopefully they're going to move it across at some point, but this does seem to look a bit like final design. So this is an issue for me design-wise. It's just daft. Let's go back. Would you buy a tank versus, would you use it as a tank versus a ship? I think like any game, if you've got the chance to shoot a ship out of the sky with the ballistic cannon, then give it a go. But it's obviously going to be quite difficult, and I think they're trying to suggest that really it's the other weapons, for instance, the missiles, that would actually be the thing that we use much more. They talk about different ammo types. Can you change them? But basically, there's no information yet on that, although it could be in future updates. I'm sure they'll do a bit like main battle tanks nowadays. So, fragmentation, and one's designed to penetrate armor and so forth. Can the Nova be loaded or dropped from a drop ship? Yes. Now this goes back to this size thing. So you're going to need a drop ship big enough to actually drop one in the first place. I'll be interested to see what the mechanics are around that. Crew positions, front of the tank while the gunner is in the middle of the tank in a separate room. Interesting, there's 3 people in this. You would have thought with a kind of modern design it would be a lot less than that, with kind of automated systems and so forth. But fine. Deployable mode, so basically no other different mode. Range of the main gun. So like a lot of things with this, it's to be determined, and basically this will come down to when they do balance passes on weapons, then in effect it will pick up the range of whatever a size 4 ballistic cannon will look like. No cargo, as you would expect. 30 to 50 rounds per minute on a ballistic cannon. Again, this comes back to this design thing I said before. That thing's going to spin like a top. 4 launchers for countermeasures. Again, they don't talk a lot about the countermeasures, so they talk about these kind of missiles and this energy piece. However that's going to work, but in effect, they'll become the key where you protect the tank, although it's still a big target. Use of Gravlev technology. it's not a bad response. It's actually it's probably the way it would go, which is it's expensive to put in, so it's worthwhile in ships. It's expensive on a vehicle, so basically why bother in the first place? You can operate it by yourself, which is good. I assume it just gets better as you put more people in there. I still debate whether you'll get a lot of fun out of a tank versus a ship. I think really that the game is much more designed around the ships and sort of limited use of things like a tank. You use a lot more of the kind of vehicles to get about in, but the tank I'm not so sure about. Doesn't have a compact mode when in storage, so basically it can't have a compact mode as you would imagine for a tank. Top speed of 20 meters per second, but a low acceleration, so a long time to reach its top speed. Which is fine. Again, you need balance passes around this to see what it's like. And any weak points. So they do talk about the rear entry point, so parts of its track. And now in a modern main battle tank, it's often the top, which is lightly armored, but they seem to be explaining that it's the back. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be relatively slow moving and the big target, especially if you're in a ship. So that's Q&A part 1. Part 2, which was the one they released on the 9th of this month. How does a driver see out of it? Does that have thermal and light? So they talk about external camera, a bit like the Super Hornet, armored flap to look outward. I would imagine they're going to load this thing up. So thermal and night kind of stuff would be what you would put in a tank. So I'd imagine it's going to have that type of stuff and different modes to look out of it. Whether you'll have kind of a 360 degree and things like that for cameras, I'm not sure about. How effective are EMPs? So they restate the kind of military grade as you would imagine. So it's not going to die, but you could have some shutdowns like you would on a ship if it's big enough. Again, they don't define what big enough is. But I suppose like anything with EMP, you can harden things, but certain things might stop. And I suppose if it's big enough, it could overload even your protection. I mean, the key for me, this is still a land vehicle. So if it really got hard, it's just going to stop much more than something flying that might, fall out the side, hit something or whatever. Fuel range, so not suitable for going huge distances, which you'd expect. Usually there'd be some sort of logistics wrapped around it. And they talk about average range, but don't really define what that is. Again, these are all in balance passes yet to come. This is probably the big bit, and the thing that's been picked up, I think, by a lot of people, which is about why should I have a battle tank if there's nearly no ship that can transport it into combat? Which is a really good point. Now they talk about spawning, and that worried me quite a lot. Spawning's very sort of standard game like, and I'm not sure it's necessarily a good thing. You don't normally spawn in the kind of game they're trying to create. I guess someone might die and you might, in effect, wake back up somewhere else. So it's a bit different for the character. But if you're just going to spawn vehicles, one of the whole mechanics of kind of moving things around just disappears. So that seems a real problem for me. Now, there was some mention, kind of a year ago or whatever, where they talked about some of the big ships that might be used to actually shift things around. Now, that hasn't been mentioned, but that was one of the key bits that we were sort of waiting for, this idea. I think they called it a star lifter. That would be used for moving stuff around, which I would have thought would be perfect for this type of stuff. More than moving just one tank, it's probably multiple tanks. But that's a game mechanic we want. Do we really want this spawn bit? So that's an issue, I think, for me. Can it hold its own against a Sabre and a Hornet? So again, it talks about it can can have missiles, laser repeaters, and all the rest of it. But really, what they're trying to say is not particularly. And if you think about it nowadays, it's fighters, or if the kind of air power that exists is something for a tank to be scared of. Usually, there's more dedicated vehicles that are designed to knock those out of the sky. Is it amphibious? No, no real expectation, I think, there that really it's amphibious. How high vertically can I aim the turret? So it's got pretty good range of movement for the main turret. So it's -10 plus 35 degrees. 35 is not bad, actually, which means you could probably get a mark on some of the ordnance that you throw out the front of it. Again, as I said before, after you span the turret several times now. Can tank be used to provide indirect artillery fire? So it's not designed for it, is what they're basically saying. And the arc's not probably big enough to do that, but you could get a little bit. I suppose, again, it depends on the ordnance, armament that you put in, and the actual shells that it's loaded. The last one, what anti-ship capabilities does it have? So primary are missiles and laser repeaters on the turrets. Again, we need more information on what those look like and how they act. Certainly the missiles will have a limited amount, but usually things like this on their own, they would have some sort of anti-air capability with them. So all in all, it's an interesting Q&A. It didn't answer everything, and certainly this mechanic around moving things around is an issue. I think that needs to be addressed later on. It opens up quite a lot of questions that need answering. But an interesting, it's good to see more stuff coming into the game. Personally, not something I would go and buy and spend real money on. Maybe good for an LTI token if you're looking for an upgrade. But I would wait in game before you ever bought one of these. And I do wonder what the kind of gameplay you will use for this. Maybe assaults on settlements, protecting settlements, things like that. Anyway, interesting. Comment in the section, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the verse.